Jay, I spoke to you earlier this morning, and we specifically talked about Nixon. If this is better, worse, or about the same than what happened with the Nixon administration.
You know, I said it was worse because in the second article of impeachment on President Nixon, they talked about the illegal use and inappropriate use of the IRS for audits. Here you have an examination going forward, and it wasn't simply an examination of the organization, but they were asking for membership, who the members were, who the donors were, what conversations took place between those members and potentially members of the House and Senate or the local state representatives. So this was far more intrusive than what happened in Watergate. And you've got the additional factor here that you have Supreme Court precedent since the 1950s that said that information is simply not to be given to the IRS. You don't give membership lists of organizations. You know, someone said it smacks of McCarthyism. I said it's worse than McCarthyism. This is who did you know, who did you talk to, are you a member, or have you ever been a member of a conservative organization?
Yeah.
And if you are, you're going to be denied exempt status or put through the ringer.
Let me give you one of the questions from the IRS set to one of the 912 project. List each past or present board member, officer, key employees, and members of their families. I mean, if this just isn't a gathering of an enemies list, I don't know what is.
And enemies of the enemies. I mean, and, you know, friends of the enemies. You got this. It's so broad in scope. We objected to those questions, by the way, Glenn. But the fact of the matter that the IRS thought they had the authority to ask them and is now coming out with an apology. Why are they coming out with an apology now? Well, there's about to be an Inspector General's report. White House Counsel was notified 3 weeks ago that this was coming. Never told the president.
Hold it just a second. Hold it. White House Counsel was told 3 weeks ago. The president said today that he heard about it in the media on Friday.
Correct. And the White House Counsel statement's going to be he didn't bother to tell the president. But the White House Counsel was notified on April 21st.
Hang on just a second.
This situation was
raise your hand. Hang on just a second. I have a studio audience here from BlogCon. Raise your hand. Is there anybody here who believes that the president wasn't informed by his general counsel? Not a soul believes that. Not a soul believes that.
Right.
Okay, so, ladies, why do you think the president or the administration came out? Did you guys demand an apology for what happened?
No.
No.
And I don't feel we've been apologized to.
Hold on just a second, Jay. You what?
I don't feel we've been apologized to. If you wrong someone, you apologize to them, not to the American Bar Association.
So what happened to you?
Well, we applied for our tax status in 2010. We waited 18 months. They sent these letters that wanting a lot of information they weren't allowed to ask us, and then information that was some reasonable. And then they sent us a letter asking us for to comply, a second letter on March 16th, and said you have 90 days. And our response due date was September 11th. Then,
but that's not 90 days from when that letter was.
Not even if you just use Mondays and Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And then they sent us a second letter that was handwritten on a handwritten envelope, and we've had thousands of pieces of paper from this, saying, "Oh, oops, sorry." And then we got a handwritten. Then we got a second letter asking for a date, and that you have to comply by this date. And again, it was September 11th.
Do you think that's just a? What do you think that means?
Rude. I don't know. Incompetent. I don't know what that is. I mean, it's intimidating. And then, you know, what they've done to our organizations, all of us, that we've spent thousands of dollars and time, and it's derailed what we would normally do. And we're talking about minuscule amounts of money. We're not talking millions. We're talking.
No, but it is minuscule to them, but not minuscule to you. And they're trying to discourage you and stop you. What's happened with you?
Well, my story is a little bit different. I received my letter in October of 2009 before everybody else did.
Holy cow.
And when I received the letter, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I immediately called one of our board members and asked him what he thought about it. They were asking for a lot of the same documentation, but the thing that really made me shake my head and think about what should I do is that they asked me to set up a login for our website so they could get in and see only the information, or the information on the back end that was only available to members. And so they could see screen names, they could see conversations, they could see documents. We had nothing to hide, but that's the hair on the back of my neck.
Jay, there was one group that was asked to take screenshots of everything that anybody has posted on their Facebook wall. Was that you?
Facebook,
yeah, we
Twitter,
had those.
Facebook, Twitter, every email, every news report that we were mentioned in, whether we were participated or not, everything. They wanted everything.
So, Jay, what do you think this is? Is this just harassment? Was this actual intelligence gathering? They said that this was just all in Cincinnati, but you have one of your letters. It shows that it comes from California. So right here, let me show it.
2 out of California, 1 out of the District of Columbia.
Right. So,
and then letters out of Cincinnati.
So tell me, they said that this was just a local problem. You worked in the 501c3 office, this very office, for the IRS. How likely is it that it was just a few local people?
I was a trial attorney for the Office of Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service that was the legal arm of these groups, and tax exempt was under our jurisdiction. This was not one rogue agent. First of all, these are tax exempt specialists. They're not general revenue agents. They're specialist trained. No one agent or 2 agents or a half dozen agents could decide to consolidate a group of audits like this, nor could they have drafted those form letters that were called form letters, the ones that had the 19 subparts, 19 or 20 questions with 8 subparts. Those were reviewed by group managers at a minimum, probably higher than that.
What is a group
manager? So this
manager?
idea that this was a couple of rogue agents in Cincinnati, nonsense.
Tell me what a group agent is. What does that mean?
A group manager is in charge. You have revenue agents, then you have tax law specialists, which is what this group was. Then you have over them group managers. These are people that are in charge of groups of these specialists. And group managers had to be involved with this in a minimum. And frankly, there is no doubt in my mind, Glenn, that this was much, much higher, because if it wasn't, it would have never reached the level it did within Treasury. And it did reach that level. We know that the head of tax exempt was briefed on this last year, actually in 2011, so a year and a half ago.
And it was,
so,
and
and
it still
also
went
meetings
on
with Chief Counsel's
it
office.
Still went on after the briefing?
Glenn, I have letters from clients and cases we're handling right now. We've got 10 that are still open, just as recently as 10 days ago. So the letter, they've just been caught. This is not an apology. They've been caught.
So
and that's what's happening.
So when
here.
we come back, I want to ask you, Jay, they just got caught. Is it just that they were going to release this information from Inspector General? And then what do you suggest that people do? Because I know a lot of 912 groups and Tea Party groups that said, I'm not going to file for the tax exempt status, or, you know, they've spent all this time and there's damages here. Can we, I mean, we're not a suing group of people, and we're only really screwing ourselves because the money comes from us anyway. So, but there has to be some penalty for this. When we come back, I want to ask you, where do you go from here? What do we do as people, and how do we ensure that this actually stops and the bad guys don't get away and just let it slip to all the people underneath? Back in a minute.